Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. We're delighted you could join us today, and we're so excited to co-host what promises to be a wonderful conversation as we think about the different kinds of artificial intelligence, the different technologies and tools related to artificial intelligence. So thank you for taking the time to learn with us about this important topic, alongside our partners at the American Association for the Advancement of Science and Sayesh Kapoor, who will be presenting to us today. My name is Christopher Jordan. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Julia Glickman. Together, we represent the Urban Innovation Team at the National League of Cities. The mission of our team is to support cities, towns, and villages in exploring and adopting technology and better using data in decision-making to meet the needs of all members of our communities, improve government services and operations, and ensure equitable access to resources and opportunities. This year, NLC, as some of you know, celebrates its 100th anniversary. So as an organization, we're taking time to look back on our achievements and the history of cities over the last century. But as we do that, we're also considering what the future of cities might look like and what role NLC might take in helping shape that future. So with that in mind, our innovation team has taken up the work of exploring various kinds of AI this year and their impacts on the public sector, and specifically on municipal government. We're researching AI's impact on city services, on key areas like housing and sustainability, and we're also convening an AI advisory committee this year to assess the technology and learn how local governments might de-risk and harness AI to do things like boost staff capacity and deliver better outcomes for residents. So we're excited to be doing that work. We have a toolkit of promising practices and case studies that we are releasing in November of this year. So we're excited to publish those findings and tools, which we're creating to help all cities of all sizes, capture the benefits of AI. So with that in mind, a good place to start is by demystifying and understanding this technology, which is why we're so delighted to join our friends at the Epicenter and Kate Stoll, to learn more about AI, to translate it and unpack it as we all get caught up to speed with AI and its various applications and use cases. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kate to introduce our speaker today. But once again, thank you so much for your time and learning alongside us. And do let us know if NLC can ever be of help in your city or community. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris, and hi everyone. It's great to have you all at this event. I'm Kate Stoll, Project Director for the Center for Scientific Evidence in Public Issues, or the Epicenter. Our mission is to build trusted relationships between experts and decision makers at all levels of government to make it easier for policy makers to access and incorporate scientific evidence into their decision-making processes. And as Chris said, we're part of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is the world's largest multidisciplinary scientific society. And we're so excited to be collaborating with NLC to host this virtual convening. I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today, a leader in the field of computer science and AI policy. Sayesh Kapoor is a Lawrence S. Rockefeller Graduate Prize Fellow in the University Center for Human Values and a computer science PhD candidate at Princeton University's Center for Information Technology Policy. He's co-author of the book AI Snake Oil. This is a book that separates the AI hype from true advances in the technologies. And the book will be available in September, so keep an eye out for it. His research examines the societal impacts of AI with a focus on reproducibility, transparency, and accountability in AI systems. He has experience in both academia and industry, including at Facebook, Columbia University, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Sayesh has been recognized with various awards, and I won't list them all here. Many of them are technical and some were popular, such as his inclusion in Time's inaugural list of the 100 most influential people in AI. So we're really excited to have him today. And we're honored that he's joined us to talk us about the different kinds of AI. Little spoiler alert, it's not just generative AI. There's lots of stuff out there. And we'll have time for questions at the end. But if you have questions while Sayesh is presenting, please feel to put them in the chat or the Q&A box to queue them up, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sayesh.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Kate, and thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely an honor to be speaking with you all. At the outset, I'll be talking a little bit about all of the different types of AI that we've seen in our own research and while investigating the real world use. And this is based on joint work with Arvind Narayanan at Princeton. And we also write a lot about these topics on AISnakeoil.com. So a quick overview of all of the topics that I'll cover today. First, we'll talk about what I mean when I say AI. I think it can be surprisingly hard to define what AI is. Then we'll dive into all of like 3 main types of AI and see what they have in common, but more importantly, how they all differ. We'll dive into exaggerated claims of how well these tools performs. And finally, I want to end with some lessons that I've learned in trying to close the feedback loop of AI hype. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first part of the talk is what I mean when I say the word AI. So despite 6 decades of work in the field of AI at this point, it's really hard to give an overarching definition that captures everything people mean when they talk about AI. In my own work and more generally when talking about AI, I found that there are 3 loose criteria that can be helpful to delineate an application of AI from one that isn't. The first is the task that's being performed by this technology, does this task require creative effort or training if a human were to perform this task? So one example is in the last few years, we've seen many applications where simply writing a description of an image is enough to create an image itself. Now, clearly that task requires creative effort for humans. And so this is an example of AI. A second criteria is that the task should not be directly specified by the creator or the developer. Like there shouldn't be a hard-coded rule for making a decision. So one example of something that's not AI is a thermostat. So a thermostat, if you think of it, is actually taking decisions in the real world to some extent. When the temperature of a certain room becomes too hot, it turns on the cooling, for example. But this behavior is directly specified, like you're directly specifying the rule. Let's say if it's above 75, turn on cooling and so on. And so this is not an example of AI. In contrast, in the last few years, we've seen examples of image recognition in AI. So if you use, let's say, Google Photos, you can search for images of your dog. And the way this operates is not by hard-coded rules, but rather by lots of examples. So Google trains its image recognition AI on lots of images of dogs and of cats, let's say. And based on all of these images, the AI system learns to distinguish between what is a dog and what is a cat. And finally, the third criteria is there should be some flexibility in the inputs. So the AI system, let's say Google's image recognition system, should not just work on images of dogs that it has already seen, but rather it should also work, let's say, for a new image of your dog, if you take an image today. So there should be some flexibility in the types of applications it can be useful for. Now, this is all a little bit like high level. I think creative effort, like the behavior not being specified and flexibility is all fine. But how does the system actually learn to do this in the first place? So that's why we come to machine learning. Machine learning is a sort of technical term to describe how an AI system might learn patterns from data. So at the end of the day, all an AI system is really doing is learning patterns from all of the data that it has been trained on. So for example, as I mentioned, given enough photos of cats as well as images of dogs, a machine learning or an ML system can learn to distinguish between new photos of cats as well as of dogs. My favorite example of this is detecting whether an image is a labradoodle or a fried chicken. And it turns out that is surprisingly hard, as you can see. But even so, like given enough images of fried chicken and labradoodles, today's machine learning systems, which is the dominant paradigm in AI, will learn to figure out which is which. And if we extend it a bit further, let's say to tools like ChatGPT, it is exactly the same principle that powers tools like ChatGPT. So for example, here we have images that are labeled either labradoodles or fried chicken. For ChatGPT, the labels are generated from all of the data on the internet. So for example, let's say there's a sentence which is, "What is your name?" that's available on the internet. This sentence turns into 4 different examples. What is your blank? And the correct answer is name. What is blank name? And the correct answer is your, and so on. Now, the trick to training systems like ChatGPT is that you do this exact same thing with a lot of the data that's available on the internet, like terabytes of data, which translates to billions of such sentences. And at the end of that process, what we have is a system that can guess the next word given a sequence of past words. So essentially, all a system like ChatGPT is doing is guessing what will come in a sentence given what you've said to it. And that's how it works at its core. Now, this might be somewhat surprising, but the reason that it works is because it's trained on such huge amounts of data on the internet that it sort of learns to guess these things right enough most of the time. Okay, so this is a brief overview of AI and machine learning. And despite the fact that AI refers to this concept of learning from past data and learning to detect patterns, different types of AI have very little in common. I'll go over 3 examples of AI that are widely in use today to point out these differences. So if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's this. AI is an umbrella term, and the underlying types of technologies have very little to do with each other, apart from the fact that they learn from data. Some of these technologies have made rapid progress in the last few years. So generative AI is the type of AI that powers ChatGPT. We've also seen generative AI in other types of modalities. So for example, on the left side on the slide here is a text-to-image model. This is an image that was generated using OpenAI's DALL-E model. And it was just generated using the prompt, an astronaut riding a horse. That was enough to create this image using the system. On the right-hand side is an example of generative AI in biomedical applications. So Google released this technology called AlphaFold, which is very useful in many applications of healthcare. So this is just to point out that generative AI has made widespread progress across different types of applications, not just in text like ChatGPT, but also in images as well as in medicine. And when we think about the issues that arise because of generative AI, the ethical issues in the real world also arise precisely because it seems to work pretty well. So ChatGPT can now generate text that is extremely convincing to people. And as a result, people are concerned about misinformation, about labor displacement, such as in occupations like copywriters, as well as on over-reliance when ChatGPT hallucinates or outputs incorrect information. And so the key thing to keep in mind is that precisely because this technology seems to work very well, many of the ethical issues are a result of that. The second type of AI, which is also in widespread use today, is AI for perception tasks, for seeing things and detecting things in images, detecting things in audio, and detecting things in speech. And one example of that is on the slide, where we are using AI to detect the yield of wheat on a farm, let's say. So this type of application has found widespread use. A lot of agriculture is now automated in this way. But the same exact application, which can be so useful in our agriculture, can also have effects like mass surveillance. So today, AI for perception has been used for facial recognition in large number of jurisdictions. And a side effect of that is that we might be concerned of the misuse potentially by authoritarian governments. So for example, we've already seen face recognition being used by China to identify the minority Uyghur population. And I think this is a sign of, again, the ethical issues with perception AI arising precisely because it seems to work so well in the form of privacy risks and misuse by authoritarian governments. Now, in contrast to the 2 types of AI on the slide here, generative AI and perception AI, which work extremely well. The third type of AI often overpromises and underdelivers. This is what we call predictive AI. So there are two applications on the slide here. The first on the left is HireVue. HireVue is a company that claims to predict which applicants will do well at a job based on simple surveys or video interviews. The survey includes questions like, do you keep your desk neat or untidy, to basically predict if people can do their job well. Now, clearly that's absurd, but this company has raised millions of dollars. On the right-hand side is Upstart, which is an AI lending provider, which basically automates the process of loan applications based on thousands of data points about an individual, including things like where they went to school and what their level of education was. Once again, with a lot of these applications have led to concerns around discrimination and widespread discrimination in loan services. And it's not just these two applications of predictive AI that have been concerning. We've seen dozens of applications across fields like education, in healthcare, financial services, but also in consequential life-changing decisions like accusing someone of fraud or predicting that someone would go on to commit a crime, and on that basis, keeping them in jail pre-trial. So unlike the two applications of AI on the left-hand side, generative and perception AI, the ethical issues with the predictive AI arise precisely because these tools don't work as well as the developers claim. Now, let's dive into this a little bit more in the third part of the talk, which is about exaggerated performance claims. One application of predictive AI, which caught my eye recently, was this tool called Retorio. Like HireVue, Retorio claims to identify winning behaviors for customer service. And they're predicting essentially which candidates will do well at their job based on simple video interviews. Now, this might seem fine until you realize that simple things like changing the background of your video interview are enough to drastically change the scores. So this was an investigative journalism report that found that simply changing the background from a plain background to a bookshelf in the background was enough to drastically increase candidates' application scores. Now, clearly, what's in a candidate's background has very little to do with how well they would perform at their job. And this is precisely the type of false signal that a lot of applications of predictive AI seem to be uncovering. We've seen applications not just in the private sector, but also in government. So for example, in 2013, Netherlands deployed an algorithm to detect child welfare fraud, in particular to detect if parents were fraudulently collecting welfare benefits for their children. The algorithm was in use for 6 years, between 2013 to 2019, and it wrongly accused thousands of families and sent many into debt. And when the use of the algorithm was uncovered, the Prime Minister and his entire cabinet resigned in the aftermath. Now, this is not just the case in the US. This is not just the case outside the US. Even in the US, we've seen many applications of predictive AI. One is healthcare technology company Epic, which launched an algorithm to detect which patients would develop sepsis. When the algorithm was launched, it was widely lauded as having an extremely high accuracy. It was in use for 4 years in thousands of US hospitals before it was found that the accuracy of the algorithm was actually much lower in clinical settings. And a year after this was found, the company discontinued this sepsis prediction model. We've also seen uses in US government and in particular in state government. So in 2018, Oregon implemented a child safety screening algorithm to predict which children are at risk of maltreatment. But after widespread reports of bias, the tool's use was discontinued in 2022. Now, what's common across these three is that all three tools are examples of predictive AI. And once again, I want to emphasize that it's not just these three tools that are sort of widely misused. There have been hundreds of such incidents in the last few years in settings like healthcare, in insurance, or mortgages, in the legal sector, and so on. So the second key takeaway from this talk is that while AI can be used to understand collectives or aggregates, making predictions about individual people is extremely hard. So here's what I mean by that. We can use AI to identify patterns on large-scale levels. What's happening in a city, How is a school doing in terms of graduation rates and so on? But as soon as we switch from making predictions about aggregates of people to making predictions about individual people, this becomes extremely hard. And in particular, all of these examples that I mentioned in the last few slides went wrong because we were trying to make predictions about people. And that turns out to be really hard. So how can we fix this? How can we close the feedback loop of hype? Well, first, we need to understand why the public or why the stakeholders who are deploying these types of systems seem to keep believing in the power of AI. And I think one place to look for that is journalism. So when Microsoft released its Bing chatbot, which was powered by ChatGPT last year, this is what the state of headlines looked like for popular news outlets. The New York Times says, Bing's AI chat, I want to be alive. The Washington Post said, the new Bing told a reporter it can feel or think things, and so on and so forth. Now, all of these headlines drastically overestimate what a chatbot really is. Because if you go back to sort of the first part of the talk, all this chatbot is doing is guessing what word is next in a sequence of given words. And so this is how sort of reporting on AI, and in particular, uncritical reporting on AI, can drive the impression that AI is much more than it is. The unfortunate part is that we've known for around 5 decades at this point that when people interact with chatbots, they tend to give in to anthropomorphism. That is the feeling that something is a human when it clearly isn't. The earliest example of this is an experiment called ELIZA, which scientist Joseph Weizenbaum conducted in 1966. This is, I think, one of the first examples of a chatbot. It is a very simple chatbot. If you say something back to it, all the system does is repeat or answer back with a question. So for example, Eliza would start with, is something troubling you? Let's say a user says, men are all alike. It would just come back with a canned response, like, what is the connection, do you suppose? And so on and so forth. The striking thing, though, is that despite this rudimentary chatbot, many people who were talking to Eliza actually felt that they were talking to a real person. Even when they were told that this is a simple piece of software, many people refused to believe that they were actually talking to a piece of software and not a real human. And so when news outlets fill up the zone with headlines like these, like Bing's AI chat saying, I want to be alive, it is exploiting anthropomorphism, our tendency to believe that like things that are not human really are. And I think this is one of the main reasons why we believe AI is more than it really is. A second concern is that when people are reporting or when news outlets are reporting on a particular AI application in the real world, the performance numbers they use can tend to misinform readers. So one example here is this Bloomberg report from 2022, where the article says that an algorithm to predict crime could predict crime with a 90% accuracy. Now, there's never enough space in a single news article to go into enough nuance about what a 90% accuracy even means. For example, let's say in a certain region today, there was like crime in 10% of these areas. And the algorithm just predicted no crime for all of the areas. This simple algorithm, which always predicts no crime, would have a 90% accuracy because it's wrong only 10% of the times when there is actually crime. And so there is not really enough space in the context of a news article to get into what accuracy even means in this case. And further, the accuracy of a model could change over time as patterns of crime change. It could change over places. So an algorithm that holds well or works well in one neighborhood might not work well in the other. But there's not really, like, the news article does not really have the space to go into this context and nuance. And this also leads to over-optimism about how well these algorithms really work. Another issue that we've seen over and over again in news articles about AI is using images of robots, even when the underlying applications have nothing to do with robots. So for example, here's a CNN article that says AI might be as effective as medical specialists, and the image is a robot arm shaking hands with a human. Now, if you dig into this article, the AI that they're talking about is much closer to an Excel spreadsheet than it is to the Terminator. And yet images of robots are widely used across articles that are describing AI. In fact, I wrote about this issue back in 2022, and Michael Hiltzik from the LA Times covered this, covered our sort of checklist not to get infected with hype. And even in this article, in this very article where he was criticizing the hype around AI, he still ended up using the image of a robot. Now, this points to this underlying issue of journalism, journalism revenues going down the drain. And in particular, because journalism has become so click dependent, images of robots might be useful in getting people to click on articles, but that does not take away from the fact that it leads to AI hype, and it leads to a lot of misinformation about how well AI actually works. So to quickly recap, how does AI hype persist in the real world? So companies are conflating different types of AI. We're conflating generative AI and perception AI, which work well but have ethical issues, with predictive AI, which does not seem to work well at all. And they're banking on this sort of conflation to sell the product. At the same time, AI research is unable to keep the industry accountable simply because of the ties that they have with industry-funded research. And as a result, most prominent AI results are exaggerated. Now, the feedback loop is completed with the uncritical reporting on AI when journalists use anthropomorphism, when they fail to talk about performance numbers, and so on. And this is what leads to sort of the hype cycle around AI. So I'll end with a few examples or tips of what we can do, what we can focus on before we deploy AI systems in the real world. The first thing is to ask what's in the training data. So the training data is the set of examples that's used to train an AI system to detect like whatever it is we're trying to predict. So for ChatGPT, the training data is a large number of websites on the internet. For predictive AI, the training data might be past instances of something happening. For example, past instances of people getting a job versus not getting a job. So if we investigate what's in the training data, we can see how similar the training data is to the system we actually want to deploy in the real world. A second question is, how was the model evaluated? And can we reevaluate the model ourselves? So on the slide here are two examples of journalists reevaluating existing models and finding deep issues with them. So on the left-hand side is a report from ProPublica back in 2016, which showed racial bias in predictive AI tools that were used to predict the risk of recidivism. And on the right-hand side is a report from 2023, which showed that software that was sold as predictive policing, so basically predicting where police should be stationed, was terrible at predicting crime. I think it was less than 1% accurate. And this is all just by reevaluating the software once it has been deployed in the real world. Now, companies are reticent to give out this data to researchers. I have tried myself, and I think companies are really intransparent. They claim they are selling trade secrets. But when counties or cities are purchasing this software, they can ask vendors for this. They can ask ongoing examinations and evaluations in order to improve the model's performance and check if it is actually working. A third question is, what are the potential harms? And in particular, when people have tried to deploy similar systems in the past, how have these similar systems failed? So one resource for this is something called the AI Incident Database. The website is incidentdatabase.ai, which has a running list of all of the failures of AI systems in the past. This includes all types of AI, generative, perception, but also predictive AI. And when deploying a certain type of AI, I think it could be very useful to check how something like that has fared in places in the past. And finally, I think one of the most important steps is to put in mechanisms to contest incorrect decisions. So especially when people are using predictive AI, these systems are often used for making life-changing decisions. And as a result, decision subjects must have some power to be able to contest these decisions in a meaningful way. So we've seen examples of predictive AI cutting off people's insurance, and they have only 10 days to appeal a decision. And what that means is that by the time they get a notice in the mail, their insurance has already been cut off. That is not an example of meaningful contestability. So I think as we're deploying systems to take, especially when we are taking consequential decisions based on these systems, providing meaningful contestability is a prerequisite. Okay, with that, I'll end my presentation, and I hope we have some time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sayash. That was great. And we do have some questions, which I'm glad to see. So keep them coming, everyone. One is a clarification question. So of the 3 types of AI you talked about today, generative, perception, and prediction, are they all based on machine learning?
By and large, the answer is yes. So machine learning is this general principle or like general way of learning from data. But how well a system actually does is dependent on how much noise or how much signal there is in the data. So when it comes to things like images of cats versus dogs, a human could, for example, accurately predict or accurately identify images of cats versus dogs most of the time. So there is enough signal in the image itself to classify a system as cat versus dog. On the other hand, when it comes to making predictions about people's future, it's extremely hard, even for like humans, to be able to predict whether someone would go on to, let's say, commit another crime or pay off their loans. And so it seems like there isn't enough signal in the data. And so there isn't a reason for us to assume that AI would be able to uncover the signal in the data and make perfect predictions.
Thank you. And a quick question. Yes, the recording will be posted, and I'll ask Sayash if he's willing to share his slides. Okay, more questions. I love it. So keep them coming. Here's one about disclosure. To what extent should public institutions disclose that they're using AI when crafting communications with the public? So for example, if you used ChatGPT to help you write an email, thoughts on that?
That's an interesting one. So I think the amount of disclosure or the sort of level at which we should disclose things depends on how consequential the decisions are. So if we are using AI to craft like a routine email, I think it's much less important to be transparent about whether you're using AI compared to if you're using AI to, let's say, determine the outcome of a bail hearing or to put someone in jail pre-trial. So I think the thresholds for disclosure become more and more important as we start using AI for more consequential things. And I think that is sort of independent of what type of AI it is. So even if you're using generative AI, to craft like a piece of legislation, for example. Not that I hope no one is doing that, but if people are, I think it becomes much more important to be transparent about how AI was used.
I think we've seen different regimes too, where there's recommendations on how you could classify high risk or medium or moderate and low risk. So those are also resources we can point out if folks are interested. Okay, let's see. So you mentioned that, journalists tend, or their editors, maybe not even the journalists, tend to put robots up to either get more clicks, and that can be confusing to readers. So do you have thoughts on what types of images would just be better, more accurate for AI stories, AI journalism stories?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's genuinely a hard sort of task, simply because there is this real tension between the revenues that a news story generates versus like how accurate and faithful it is to the article. But I have seen examples of journalists coming around this in very creative ways. So one of my collaborators is journalist Ari Sen, who wrote this brilliant piece on how universities were using AI to essentially surveil students, and in some case, surveil student protesters. And so in order to come up with an image, I think he focused and leaned in heavily on the surveillance aspect of it. So his cover image was this like this GIF, basically, of a large eye looking at a student working in front of a computer. So I think that was very successful. I think he was pretty proud of not having to resort to an image of a robot. So I do think it requires care and thought. But again, at the end of the day, I think there are things people can do to sort of balance these two incentives.
Thank you. So you made the point that sometimes accuracy metrics are not, they're either not accurately reported or they're misleading because you were trained in one setting. In the real world, that accuracy just isn't true anymore. So do you have a sense of like what metrics or what types of things should we be measuring to get a better sense of how well these AI systems will work for your own use?
Absolutely. I think the metric that we use should be very tied to the specific applications. So in some cases, we care a lot more about not having any false positives. So for example, if we are sending people to jail based on predictions about the future, I think as like a country and in terms of the ethos, we have this notion that, we are heavily leaning to the burden of proof being on the prosecutors. And so in that case, false positives are a lot more important. Similarly, for cases in the healthcare settings, I think we want the opposite. So we don't want false negatives. We don't want someone to have cancer, and the system says that they don't really have cancer, right? And so there, I think the metric changes to false negatives. And I think in general, we should be cognizant of like what the specific thing is that we're trying to achieve using AI. And that helps us create a new metric. When it comes to news stories, though, I think, again, it becomes really hard to sort of do this type of work without going into a lot of nuance. I think some journalists have managed to do that, but then like I know for a fact that journalists have like deadlines that they have to deal with and word limits and so on. And so in like 1,000-word article, I would say it's almost impossible to be able to be nuanced enough to say that an algorithm has like 90% accuracy or like 50% false positive rate or whatever, without misleading readers.
I'm curious if you've seen, just to follow up on that, like, I'm curious if you've seen examples where cities or other public entities have run smaller pilots to get a better sense of like, okay, with all of our variables in our community, instead of, starting out big at scale, like, is that an approach that can be useful, or have you seen examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually, to be honest, that's possibly the best kind of approach to run a small scale pilot, because despite what an AI vendor might say, I think there are differences between their test beds and the real world that will almost never be, we'll almost never be able to detect beforehand, and we'll almost never be able to anticipate the impact. So one example of this is the city of Toronto, actually, not a US city, but still, where they wanted to develop an algorithm to say if the beach was safe enough to swim in. And so earlier, what they used to do was they used to check for bacteria every single day, but the results usually took a few hours. So they used to rely on the previous day's results to detect if the beaches, or to sort of say if a beach is safe to swim in on a given day. And a vendor came up to them and sold them this AI technology for doing it using like data and not relying on this specific test. It turned out that this tool was much worse than the previous method. So it had it was wrong on 60% of the days. So on 60% of the days that the beach was declared safe to swim in, it wasn't actually. But because the city only deployed it on one beach for like 90 days or so, I think they were able to detect it. And ultimately, they did not go forward with that vendor. So this type of pilot study, it already seems like quite bad, frankly, but it could have been a lot worse if it was deployed citywide on all beaches for an extended period of time.
Example. Do you have do you have any other examples of where government has used applications of AI that's not generative AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI for perception has been used both for like very useful things as well as for somewhat frightening things quite a bit. So in terms of the useful category, we've used AI for perception to detect in the aftermath of, let's say, a hurricane, how to disperse aid. So we've been using this for, I think, the last 10 years or so now in various capacities, depending on how technically equipped governments are. We've also used data analytics, which is looking at collectives instead of individuals, and using these trends to identify where interventions would be needed. So for example, we've used these types of tools to identify how to prioritize school district funding and so on. Mm-hmm. On the frightening side, I think we have seen more and more that governments are willing to use AI for perception in order to surveil people. This has happened somewhat in the US, but it has happened en masse in China, where we have a number of tools that are now being used to surveil especially minority populations across the country. And so I think, as with anything else, I think it is somewhat dual-edged. Given the fact that it works, it is somewhat dual-edged. And so we need to be quite cognizant about how much we need to sort of lean into using AI for perception, especially for things like surveillance.
I know you said that it was challenging for researchers, so like typically academics to get access to training data from AI companies, correct? Do you know of any public agencies that have been able to, ask and get the information about the training data and how they did it?
I think yes. So again, this is not an example of AI, but the US federal government actually has a long history of like procurement side policies. So I think procurement is one of the biggest ways in which governments can actually get this done. And so one of the things that the US government has done is at the federal level, agencies, if they want a piece of software, they've claimed that it has to be open source. And that's because they realize that open sourcing software means that any of the issues would be much easier to find. And as a result of that, I think we've made a lot of progress in being able to uncover issues with this type of software before they cause harm in the real world. So I think anytime like a city or a government is trying to procure something, I think that's one of the best levers is to place that as a condition. Because like at the end of the day, we can only do so much when it comes to forcing companies to disclose. I think at some point it even becomes harmful. It's compelled speech. And so it runs afoul of like the First Amendment and so on. But when it comes to procurement and you're entering a contract with a third party, I think it becomes much easier to state that there are certain transparency requirements as part of the contract.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you also have thoughts on, as you say, sometimes it's hard to predict when these things go wrong or how they'll go wrong. So what are your thoughts on, continued evaluations or audits or, you check every period of time, for example? Is that another way to, have you seen that used and does that pick up issues that you wouldn't find in advance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another one of the things that we should sort of invest more in. We've seen that already. So for example, I mentioned this Oregon tool for predicting at-risk kids and which kids will be at risk of child maltreatment. The issues with that were found because of an AP investigation that looked into the tool and that looked at reports of bias against Black families. And so I think that sort of thing is already sort of incentivized, but not institutionally. So it's only when researchers are looking at a product or like a news organization or an investigative journalist is looking at a product after it's been released. But I think there are only so many times that academics can do this because unfortunately, I think academics are also incentivized to create novel results. And so, the first 5 algorithmic audits are great. But then after that, I think we have to figure out ways to make them more institutionalized.
Yes, that is a challenge. Here's another question. Are you aware of any resources or approaches to help municipal policymakers assess technical feasibility of a variety of AI use case ideas that an organization might have?
So I think my favorite example of this type of thing are just the incident databases that I mentioned. So I think at this point, the 2 most widely used incident databases have over 1,000 reports each. And in these 1,000 reports are examples of generative AI, of AI for perception, of predictive AI, and so on. And so just looking back at what failure modes, past applications of the specific kind that you want to deploy might have had is extremely powerful. I think every single time I see news reports of new algorithmic or AI failures, I sort of look up this type of application in the incident database, and usually I find like half a dozen hits. And so I think at this point, they've become a real resource in sort of preempting AI failures. I think they won't be helpful for every single use case because there might be new applications. But even if they help for like 80% of the use cases that you might think about, I think that's a win.
Here's a specific question about using AI to take notes in Zoom calls. I mean, there's all these new applications. They're fun to try out. I know there have been concerns about allowing people in Zoom calls and without being able to know who they are. Do you think this could be a safety issue to leak information? Oh, I see. If you're taking notes on a government meeting, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So in general, I think we have to sort of shore up our like cybersecurity practices. I think this is one of the things we can do. But I think taking notes from meetings is one of the applications of generative AI that I'm quite bullish about, actually, because I think it is particularly suited to sort of summarizing things. This is exactly the type of data these models have been trained on. And so the models are particularly likely to be good at it. And so in general, I think these tools might work well. From the safety point of view, of course, like if the applications that we are relying on are rogue, then they can absolutely sort of siphon away all of this data. But that's why it's important to rely on like trusted vendors or people who sort of signed a contract, or people who are like reliable or trustworthy companies to create these or to use their products instead of like products that you haven't heard of, or companies that you might not know who's built a product from.
Right. Yeah, that does seem like it could be a really helpful application. I know I could use that. Here's another question that definitely gets at the heart of policy and AI. Do you think institutions will need liability insurance for using AI? Is the law identifying who's responsible when things go wrong, particularly with regard to public health and safety? And this is a big question, so go with it where you want.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. So I do think there is a question of like who the primary responsible party is when it comes to the use of AI that goes wrong. That said, for domains like public health and safety, at least so far, I think we have been placing responsibility on the deployers of the system for not adequately checking that something works or does not work in their domain, rather than the creators of the system. Now, I mean, in particular, like the contracts might allocate responsibility differently. But overall, when we've seen, let's say, an institution using AI, for example, the Dutch government using AI to detect welfare fraud, it was the government that was blamed at the end of it and the damages that were caused. So right now, actually, the Dutch government is in the process of disbursing millions of euros to the people who were affected by the child welfare fraud algorithm, way more than the amount that they demanded back. And so they weren't able to sort of shift responsibility onto developers of the algorithm. I think to some extent, this is fair. I think the moment the algorithm provider is transparent about their limitations, they're transparent about the fact that this algorithm works in this set of domains and does not work in this other set of domains, and the user or the deployer still uses these algorithms for this other type of domains, I think that's when the liability shifts to the deployer and away from the algorithm developer. So it depends on how transparent they are about the limitations and whether they did this work of preemptively checking for limitations. But so far, what we've seen is mostly the parties deploying the algorithms have been held responsible.
And I have a follow-up question on transparency here is it becoming more common for AI developers and vendors to say, this is exactly how you're supposed to use this system and nothing else, like to clarify, like, this is the use case. It doesn't include X, Y, and Z. It only includes Q, for example.
I would say, like, unfortunately not. I think it would be a great outcome if developers were more transparent about the system's limitations. But what we're seeing more and more, especially with generative AI, is that generative AI companies want to create general purpose tools. So they don't want to sort of circumscribe what their tools can be used for. In ads for Google Gemini, they do everything from like summarizing emails to writing birthday notes to legal summaries and so on. And I think that's on purpose. It's on purpose that these companies are sort of claiming that they're building general purpose technologies that's helpful for the bottom line. It's helpful for advertising and so on. And unfortunately, as a side effect of that, the idea of like well-scoped applications has sort of disappeared. I do wish it'll make a comeback. I do think it'll be the case that even with generative AI, we'll need like guardrails around specific applications. So for example, if you're using it for the law, you might have trained it on law-specific data, and then you can circumscribe the applications. But as of right now, because these companies want to sell general purpose tools, we haven't really seen that focus.
Interesting. Here's another question. Are you aware of any applications of predictive AI and facial recognition technology? You brought this up in your talk, but maybe you could give some more examples, policing, airport security, etc.
Yeah, so I think face recognition is used like all over the world today. I think there are many different strains of face recognition. So you might have like 1:1 face recognition where, you know, a single person's face is matched on, you know, like, let's say in an iPhone, for example, and Face ID is identifying just that one person. The privacy harms, the privacy risks from that are pretty low because you only need to identify one person and no one else, and you're only using it on a local level. Then you have many-to-one identification, where you have like a database of many different people, and you can identify one person, any one person from this large database. I think we're seeing some applications of this type of technology that are helpful. So for example, the Department of Homeland Security said that it used this type of face recognition to identify many missing children in the last couple of years, which is fantastic, right? Like these children were missing, they might have like been lost, they might have been kidnapped and so on. And the police basically had no way of finding these children if it were not for face recognition. But then we also have quite dubious examples of face recognition. So for example, last year in the Madison Square Gardens in New York City, the owner of Madison Square Gardens was under a lawsuit by this particular law firm. And what he decided to do was ban every single lawyer who was working in this law firm from entering the Madison Square Gardens, which is a public venue. And so even people who'd bought like $500 tickets to attend a concert were denied entry because this is something we can do now. This is like face recognition has enabled us to even surveil this type of public venue with so much ease. And so like, I think the gamut of face recognition spans like completely mundane things like face recognition to very useful things like the DHS using face recognition to identify missing kids, to extremely dubious things like the Madison Square Gardens owner deciding that no one from a given law firm, even if they weren't the lawyers who were litigating against them, would be allowed to the venue anymore.
Wow, so many examples. It's great to hear and scary to hear at the same time. So here's a question. I'll try to shorten it a little bit, but it's thinking through the capabilities of humans and AI, right? So and also the errors that both AI and humans make, right? So humans are also not infallible. So why would you expect AI to do better than humans? And with AI, when you find bias, can you retrain it and really, you know, show your work? So whereas with humans, you wouldn't. So do you have thoughts on kind of like, yeah, the thoughts on human and AI bias and fallibility and what we can expect?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. So I think the key difference between human decision-making and AI decision-making is that we actually don't mean decisions by a single human when we are talking about human decision-making. What we mean is decisions by a bureaucracy. So if it were like decision-making by a single individual, we would go back to the rule of man and not the rule of law, right? Like that is what we had with monarchies and so on. And so what we are actually replacing AI with is not a single human making that decision, which is of course fallible in all sorts of ways. There's of course bias and so on, but rather the rule of law, like the rule of institutions and bureaucracies that have been created to account for this type of human decision-making, that have mechanisms for contestability, that have mechanisms for like redress, and that is what we're sort of replacing AI with. And so if you think about how we're designing institutions around AI, the way to incorporate AI into these institutions is to have mechanisms for contestability, is to have these mechanisms for retraining AI systems when things go wrong. Unfortunately, as of right now, the way companies are selling predictive AI tools especially is as a sort of replacement for entire bureaucracies, not as a replacement for individual humans. And when that's the case, then we lose out on all of the benefits of the rule of law. We lose out on all of the benefits of like redress and contestability and, you know, different people having different decision-making rules, prioritizing different things differently. So for example, one issue that people have highlighted is homogenization. So when you have multiple companies relying on the same AI tool to hire a person, then instead of each of these companies having their own criteria for hiring someone, all of these companies are now going to reject this applicant. So what might have been a frustrating job search already somewhat becomes impossible when you have all of these companies relying on the same decision-making tool. And we have these single points of failure, which weren't existing previously and which we don't have mechanisms to address right now.
Thank you. Great perspective. We are almost out of time, but I'll ask you to answer this question quickly because we have one more question. I'm trying to get to it. With the technology changing so quickly, do you have recommendations or resources to stay up to date? And appreciate the incident database was noted, and use cases would be helpful. So anything you want to throw out there, and then we'll also point to a few resources as we close.
Absolutely. So I think I really sort of appreciate the reporting of many journalists who sort of helped me stay up to speed with AI. I think Casey Newton is one, Kashmir Hill at the New York Times, Julia Angwin at Proof News. And in general, like I think, at least when it comes to AI harm, journalists are way ahead of everyone else in documenting these harms, in figuring out what mechanisms are going wrong, in figuring out how we can fix things. And so like these three people, but also organizations like MIT Tech Review, Proof News, even the tech reporting on the New York Times, I think has been very helpful.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. Well, we now have a whole new reading list we can all check in on. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sayesh. Your insights were so helpful and just very thoughtful on all the opportunities and risks and approaches to AI and in city use. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks a lot for having me. This is my pleasure.
Great. Well, and thanks to everyone who showed up today. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this webinar, and even more importantly, what types of issues you'd like to learn about in the future with respect to AI in municipal use. So there will be an email going out to all of you with a link to a very short survey. We'd love it if you'd spend just a couple minutes letting us know what you thought. And of course, you can also reach out to the wonderful team at NLC, Chris and Julia at innovation@nlc.org with any follow-up questions or suggestions. I've also put my contact email here. Would love to hear from any of you. And we will also follow up with additional resources that may be useful to you. So thank you again so much for being here, and appreciate all your time. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.